serum ferritin is a measure of how much iron is stored in your body. It reflects iron storage. Everyone stores iron in their body, and you store it mostly in bone marrow in these big bones here in your legs. It just goes in there and you can store iron. So if your nutrition is at the point where you're consuming more iron than you're using, you will store it. But at some point, there's no storage place left. And if you overfill the storage, it'll start storing it where you don't want it to be stored, and it could even store it in your heart muscle, and it can kill you. So you don't want too much iron. And the ferritin measures that. Tells you approximately what your iron storage status is. Now, as opposed to hemoglobin, the range of a normal serum ferritin is massive. Normal serum ferritin range between about 30 and 300. Those are the numbers you're dealing with. So if you have a 50, yeah, you're in a good range. Or if you have a 210, yeah, you're okay. But if you get more than about 300, that's starting to get a little risky on where you're going to start storing it. And you can die from it, from too much iron.
Is there a relationship between the two? Like if one number is high, is there a correlation to where your hemoglobin might be?
Nope. And this is what's so, because people started talking about ferritin maybe 10 or 20 years ago, and they said, oh, poor girl, your ferritin's only 30. You know, you can't run. Well, the ferritin doesn't tell you. Hemoglobin tells you what you can run. Now, when you measure ferritin, what you need to do is have a reference to some other measurement. In other words, I will agree, if your ferritin is 30, that could either be a good number or a bad number. Because if 6 weeks ago it was 50 and you got 30 now, that's bad. That means you're using your stored iron up faster than you're consuming iron. But you're still okay. But if 6 weeks ago your ferritin was 15 and now it's 30, now 30 is great because it's going up. So you can't take just a specific ferritin reading and say you're good or bad because you don't know where it's coming from or where it's going. You've got to have it periodically done. The bad news about measuring ferritin is expensive. It's about $100 a shot, whereas just a hemoglobin is what they call a CBC, a complete blood count, which gives you red cell, white cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and that's not very expensive, maybe $30 or something like that. But the ferritin is quite a bit more expensive. And I know people that say, oh, your hemoglobin's below, or your ferritin's below 50, you're in trouble as a runner. No, that's not true at all. I don't know if any of you remember a guy named Joachim Cruz. Yeah. Pretty good 800-meter runner. I watched him run 4 races in L.A. They had a prelim, a quarterfinal, semifinal, and final, and he led 7 of those 8 races, 7 of the 8 laps of that, and won the gold medal. And I tested him for 5 years during that time, and his ferritin, serum ferritin, varied between 22 and 29. And there's a lot of people that say, oh, poor boy, you only got a 25 ferritin, you're in trouble. But that was his good range. Wasn't going anywhere, wasn't going down, wasn't going up, it was just right there, which means he was consuming enough iron to maintain that level of storage, but not losing it, not necessarily improving it, but still doing fine. So you got to be real careful when you start talking about blood tests. And it's very, very good, as I mentioned, to start this whole thing, to get tested when you're feeling good. Because what are you going to compare it to? You wait till you feel lousy and then get a test, and maybe the value you got when you're feeling lousy was no different than when you felt good. So what are you going to compare that lousy feeling test to? How do you know? If you had a 13.5 hemoglobin and it used to be 13.5 and it's still 13.5, but now you're feeling miserable, what's the 13.5? You're going to say, oh, I guess that's too low. No, it's not, because that's what it was when you felt great. You got to look at something else. So it's really good to get a test when you're feeling great, instead of waiting till you feel bad to get tested, because that lets you know what you're comparing it to. I had a guy that was into taking all kinds of iron. He wanted to drive his iron up, and his hematocrit was like, it was low originally. It was under 40, which means he was a 13 or 12 or something in hemoglobin. And he started taking iron, and it started going up. And I learned real quick, if you're having an athlete be tested, and you want to find out what they are, if you get the results of the test, and before you tell the athlete what the results are, ask them how they're feeling. Because if you tell them first you got a low one, oh, and I've been feeling miserable too. So ask them how they're feeling before you tell them. This guy, his hematocrit had been going up from under 40, mid 30s, 40s, 45. It had gone all the way to 49 or 50. And then the last time I tested him, it was 44. And I asked him how he felt, and he said, I felt great. I just ran a 27:39 10K, a big PR. I said, well, and your ferritin's down, or your hemoglobin, or your hematocrit's down. So keeping it down in a good range is good because the blood is thinner to be moved through the system. People pump a lot of blood. Good athletes pump a lot of blood. I've measured a lot of them. You'd be surprised how much people pump. There have been cases of athletes pumping 40 liters a minute. 40 liters of blood that heart's pumping around per minute. That's a lot of gallons. It's amazing.